The Doctrine of Man and Sin, Anthropology. We introduced this last week. And we were making the point last week how hugely important it is to study anthropology, that is the doctrine of man and man as it relates to sin. And the point I wanted you to take away from last week's lecture was this point that the whole superstructure of your theology, the whole building that you build with regard to your theological understanding is pretty much determined by the foundation you lay at this level, at this course unit. So that we say if you miss it here, you're quite likely to miss it for the rest of your theological superstructure, the theological journey. So it was very important then that we deal with this. But what I want to do today in this first lecture is to deal with the creation of man. All right, the creation of man. And the reason I want to deal with that is one would have imagined that we didn't need to deal with that subject at all. One would have imagined that the subject should be taken for granted, that it is a point upon which we need to be agreed ab initio, from the start. As my teacher loved to say, we take it a priori. That is, it's an assumption we make before we begin any discussion that there is a creator and that we are creatures. One would have imagined that that should be the state of affairs, but it is not. It is not. The story of creation, and particularly the origin of mankind, has been the subject of heated, controversial, and sometimes very, very divisive conversations in the field of theology, that is the study of religion and God, but also in the field of philosophy, human beings just trying to understand their environment, and also in the field of science. All right? So that dealing with science, we have a controversy there. Dealing with philosophy, we have controversy there. Dealing with theology or religious studies, we have controversies there. The doctrine of creation seeks to understand how did reality come to be? How did reality come to be? That which we see, that which we experience, that which we cannot see, by reason of the fact that it is outside of the five senses of our perceptions naturally. That is the sense of touch, the sense of hearing, the sense of sight, the sense of smell, the sense of taste. Those are the ways in which we relate to our world, isn't it? We take in information either by what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell, or what we touch. That is the way we relate to reality. Empirical reality is what we would say. Everything matter. How did it come to be? And especially now, we are dealing more particularly with the origin of man. The origin of man. Now, there are cultural views, obviously. And every culture, most cultures I should say, in the world have a story about the origin of mankind. You know, there are those who, like in the mountain, that is in Mount Kenya, they talk about the children of Mumbi and how they came about, and the Maasais have a way, I think they say there's a moran that dropped from heaven, whatever thing. There are stories, there are stories, there are stories. So culturally then, we have stories. Laws have their own stories of the origin of species and the origin of mankind. And there are so many interesting things they could tell you. That's an amazing thing to just take an excursion into the different cultural views that are there with regard to the origin of mankind. But then not just the cultural views, I'm just doing a cursory glance at these things. There is what you might then call the scientific, or sometimes we talk about naturalistic view of existence, reality. And here, by the way, the technical term that has gained currency since the middle part of the 19th century is what is sometimes, no, actually all the time, called Darwinian evolution. Darwinian evolution. There was a man, a British man, I believe, by the way, surprisingly, an Anglican by the name of Charles Darwin. Is it Richard Darwin? Charles Darwin, yeah? Charles Darwin, that's right. Charles Darwin, in the middle part of the 19th century, this is 18 something, came up with a theory, and it remains a theory. He called it the theory of evolution. Basically, the theory of evolution is the contention, is the idea, is the supposition that all matter evolved from simpler evolution, from simpler life forms. But what we see today is not what was there originally. What we see today is not what was there originally. That if you're to look at mankind, that which the scientists call the Homo sapiens or the Homo sapiens, the intelligent creature, that they were not the way they are now. There was a time that they were sort of apes, and then they were smaller kind of monkeys, and then they were reptiles, and then they were something, amoebic, kind of flagella, those kind of microorganisms, single cell organisms, all right? And then now we have what we have. That's called evolution. Evolution. Now, the origin of life, then, Darwinianism says, is, at least by the time I was reading this, what they themselves would call the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory simply is that there used to be this one massive, gigantic, humongous rock that existed. It's funny actually. But this rock that existed in time, in space, but it had a lot of gaseous activity. Intense gaseous activity. Gases were combusting, if you understand the word combusting, combustion, fighting, mingling within that rock. And they were sort of bustling with ferocious velocity and intensity within this rock here. But there comes a time when the gases can no longer be contained within that rock, that they need to burst out. Okay? Those gases. These gases, by reason of the intense combustive activity, burst out. Bang! Alright? Boom! There was an explosion. And this explosion split this rock into segments, into parts. Now they say these parts are the galaxies the planetary systems, meteors, all right? The celestial, what you'd call heavenly bodies. The planets came to be because of this explosion, so that one part went the other way, the other part went the other way, the other part went the other way. But in the process of that explosion, rather we should say implosion, in the process of it, there was a release of gases into the atmosphere. Those gases which were combusting inside that led to the explosion, right? Released into the atmosphere. Now when these gases were released into the atmosphere, some of the gases were nitrogen, which your high school chemistry should teach you is a very, very explosive gas, nitrogen. In fact, there is such a thing as a nitrogen bomb. Nitrogen, a dangerous gas. That is what your high school chemistry will tell you. It is always represented by the symbol, atomic symbol N. Is that right? Nitrogen? Sorry. Anyway, another gas that was released into the atmosphere is a gas called hydrogen, which has the atomic symbol H. Hydrogen. Another very explosive gas, by the way. And the third one is a gas which we call what? Oxygen. Oxygen. Now, what the scientists, at least by then, were telling us is that when those gases were released into the atmosphere, they were released in different quantities. Say, for example, when those atomic elements, that is, the gaseous elements, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, sorry, it's just a bit of chemistry here, okay? I know this is not something you want to hear. It doesn't sound like the Bible, and it is correct. Nitrogen, one part of nitrogen, molecular part of nitrogen combined with one part of hydrogen, all right? When they were released in the atmosphere, right? And I think these were 4 parts of hydrogen. And then what's the last one? Oxygen. So how many gases do you have there? Now when those gases mix, the gas which is formed by the mixing of nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen is a gas which has a chemical formula NH4O. That is 1 part nitrogen, 4 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. It forms what you call ammonia gas. Okay? Sorry, we're just in high school chemistry now. Just reminding ourselves. Ammonia gas. From ammonia gas, we get something, alright? So from this gaseous exchange came what? So process number 1, gaseous activity. Process number 2, ammonia gas. Sorry, that chemical, whatever. And then process number 3, from ammonia gas, we got what is called amino acid. Amino acid, which is really acid that is formed from ammonia. Okay? Very lethal, by the way, it kills. Scientists have been able to establish, at least that much we can give them, that in fact that which you call amino acid is in fact the beginnings of compound in all living things. And that compound we call proteins. Proteins. Now, proteins is the precursor, is the one which forms that which now all of you would know, and you are told to eat it. It is called what? Proteins. From the proteins, okay, there is a sixth process which is called single cell. Gaseous activity, ammonia gas, amino acid, proteins, protein, single cell. So that if you are to cut a human being and go to the very cell structure now, again, your high school tells you something called cell structure, isn't it? A human body, or any other living thing for that matter, is composed of millions of cells, perhaps billions of cells. Now that cell is formed by something we call what? Protein. So we say if you have low blood, you need to eat a lot of protein, isn't it? It tells the formulation of cells in the body. Protein. And that's a single cell. So a single cell, in fact, they tell us that in your cell, all right, in your cell, there's something called the DNA. The deoxyribonucleic acid is what they call it. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Don't remember that. You don't have to remember it. Okay. But that one then is that which has, they say, every information about who you will become. If your color, skin color will be dark or light, if you'll be tall or short, long hair, short hair, okay? All that information is contained in that thing called the DNA. The DNA is in the cell. So what scientists are telling us is that we came to be. So from that cell multiplied, okay? And then multiplied, and as it continued to multiply by a process we call mitosis, a process of cell replication and multiplication. Mitosis. Then we became something of an amoeba. You know amoeba? Amoeba is a single cell organism. It's a microscopic organism. You cannot see it with the eyes. It's very small. Only under a microscope can it be seen. We were that, they say. And then we grew. Have you seen tadpoles? Tadpoles? When the rain rains and then those little frogs that run, that tadpole. From a single cell we became something of a tadpole with a tail. And then from a tadpole we became a lizard. Okay? Something of a reptile. And then somewhere along the line we lost the tail. So we became monkeys, and then monkeys lose the tail. Ramapithecus or Homo erectus, and then Homo sapiens. You know, that kind of process is called Darwinian evolution. And how did we evolve? What controlled evolution? Darwin taught us that what control, again, this is a class on biology and chemistry, because this is a scientific view that is out there about the existence of us. And so you need to be prepared to be able to answer that question when it comes up. So it's not irrelevant. It challenges biblical account. Now then, stay with me, sorry. I know this is difficult. It takes you back to some place you don't want to go back to. But if you would just be patient, please. This would be nice. How we evolve from simpler life form, from gases to proteins to single cells to complex cellular structures, and then to where we are. How did we become that? Darwin calls that survival of the species. And the other name is the strongest survive. and the weakest die off. So, for example, if the world will change, they talk about climate change now, don't they? Climate change. And they say the climate is changing us. Women are becoming infertile, men are becoming infertile, I don't know what other thing is happening, sicknesses are coming, cancers are increasing, da. The strongest within the species will adapt. Their bodies will change to sort of conform to the physical environment. Those whose bodies are able to conform will survive and will evolve. That means there's something in them that will develop that can deal with the heat. There will be a development, a physical development, by reason of adaptation. But there are those who are very weak already. They will die. In fact, some people say the corona thing is an evolutionary thing. There are those who are weak, they will die off. The strongest will get immunity. And it's not just immunity from coronavirus, it will be immunity from other diseases as well. And that kind of stuff. So you have that kind of thing going here. Survival of the fittest. The strongest survive. Survival of the species. Is this how the Bible teaches us that we became what we are? Is it what the Bible teaches? Have you read that in the Bible? No, it is not. So we can say Darwinian evolution is a wrong view with regard to the Bible's teaching. The cultural view is wrong, all right? The scientific view, the naturalistic view, Darwinian evolution is wrong as well. Now, philosophical views have grappled with this idea as well, and they've really tried to deal with it from a philosophical point of view. But philosophy will always reach a point where it fails to account for the rest of reality. If you're dealing with Platonism, this is kind of a philosophy of the ancient time. They conceived of this, and I've talked to you about this at some point in your lectures, with this ultimate reality. Ultimate reality. This creative force, creative power, which the Greeks call the Logos. Then that the Logos is responsible for the existence of all things, all reality. But how did Logos produce reality? The Greeks did not answer that. In fact, where did the Logos come from? The Greeks could not answer that. Philosophy fails. Just like when scientists told us of this big rock, and they told us everything began from here. We are saying, but what made this rock come to be? Where did this rock come from? And scientists will tell us that behind it is what they're calling a locked door. That's a locked door. We don't know what was before. We can only account for reality from here. But the Bible takes us behind that door, doesn't it? And it tells us the beginning. In the beginning? So behind this, there is God. So somebody has to reckon with the idea of God somewhere. Now we are saying then that the Christian view is of creation. We believe that all matter was created by God. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Yeah, in the beginning. The beginning of all things is with God. Everything we see was made by God. It didn't come from some gaseous exchange, because we have to ask you, even that gas, where did that gas come from? You know. In the beginning, God. And the record of Genesis chapter 1 is the record of God creating everything. The heavens and the earth, the plants, the trees, the flowers, the birds of the air, the animals in the wilderness, the insects that crawl, human beings, and so on, the oceans, the mountains, the rivers, the lakes, everything, the flowers, all of that was made by Almighty God. But it is interesting that chapter 1, verse 31 tells us something there that I want you to observe. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. Verse 31 of chapter 1, Genesis, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. So God made everything, and God made everything good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. So we are told there that God made everything. The question then that comes with regard to that creation is to be found in verse 26. That's where we go next in dealing with this matter of the creation of man. And now we are narrowing down to the real issue of man's creation. We are told then that even human beings did not come from simpler life forms. They did come from primitive sort of existence to kind of evolve, as it were, to change molecularly and physically, biologically, chemically even, to what the scientists would like to tell us are more complex life forms. No, that did not happen like that. That did not happen like that. So, chapter 1 and verse 26, we hear God speaking. God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created, verse 27, man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, and God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So the question that has always come is the next that I want us to deal with. How many parts then are there to man? All right? Or really, to bring that question before, what is this thing that we call the soul of man? Now we understand, for example, that Adam and Eve were made directly from the hands of God. For example, God, this is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, isn't it? Genesis 2 and verse 7. That God went to the dust of the ground which he had created, and out of the dust of the ground, God formed the physical body of man. And then the second thing that God does is God breathes into the nostrils of man the breath of life, Genesis 2:7, and man becomes what? A living being, or a living creature, or a living soul. Then when it comes to the woman, Eve, God causes a deep sleep to come over man. And as man is asleep, sedated as it were, put under anesthesia, that's what the doctors will do before they operate, isn't it? Put somebody to sleep. God puts Adam to sleep, and then out of the rib of Adam, God forms Eve. And somebody joked about it. Said the reason why men don't understand women is because when women are being created, men were asleep. So we cannot understand them, isn't it? Somebody joked like that. But out of the rib of Adam, Eve is created. So we know how Adam came to be from the dust of the ground and from the breath of God. We know how Eve came to be, out of the rib of what? Adam. You could say the DNA of Adam produced Eve in the hands of God. But when we give birth to children, are they actually created by God? Or they're a result of just what we are? Is your child nothing more than sperm and egg, ovary, or is there something more to our children? In other words, the question here is this, and actually I'll put that question, it's one question, but I'll put it in two, all right? Question number one, what is the origin of the human soul? Number one. But the other way of asking that question, a different way of asking the same question, is this. The origin of the human soul. What is the origin of the human soul? The next way of asking this is, are humans just like animals? And there is a text even in Ecclesiastes, I think chapter 3 verse 21, which says the body of a man is not different from the body of an animal. Is that true? Is that true? Surely. You have four, this is what you call limbs. The front limbs and the hind limbs. Or only that we walk on two limbs and animals walk on four limbs. If I cut you now, what color of liquid will come out of you? If I cut a cow, slaughter a cow, what color of liquid comes out of them? Does the meat look the same? Yes. So how are we different from animals? It's a question here. It's a question. But it's a question of the origin of the human soul. Do we even have a soul? Let's ask that question in a third way. It's one question, I'm only asking it in three different ways, okay? Because here, we would argue, won't we? The vast majority of us, all of us I believe, would argue that in fact we are different from animals. We are not animals. We will argue like that. I will argue like that. And I will say you cannot compare me to an animal because I have something called a soul. An animal doesn't have a soul. I have a rational, in fact I should say, a rational soul. I'm a thinking, reasonable, feeling, interacting, processing being. And that is what makes me a human soul. But the question is, when do we get our souls? Now, there are three basic answers to this question, as you will find them. Three basic general answers, as you will find them in the field of anthropology, the study of humanity, man and whatever. The first view with regard to the existence or otherwise, the origin of the human soul, if at all it exists, is again the scientific view. And the scientific view would be basically that there is no such a thing as a soul, really, in distinction to the body. Scientists will tell us we are nothing more than chemicals. We are humans who came from single cells, which came from protein, which came from proteins, which came from amino acid, ammonia gas, which came from that combustion and gaseous activity which happened at the beginning of the Big Bang. That's how they'll say it. So there is no soul really. And what the scientists will say is if we die, we just die. There is nothing else that goes forward. If I fall here, the whole of me has fallen here. There's nothing more. Because all there is gases, all there is this matter, all there is chemicals. So they will deny the idea of the existence of a soul. That is why scientists do not believe in hell and heaven. If you die, you die. You rot, you become manure, you feed plants, plants die, they become manure, and that's it. There's nothing more. There's no meeting with God because there's no soul. Do we believe that? No, we do not. Thank you. Yeah. That's scientific view. Basically, we are what we see. There is something else that we would simply, let's call it a philosophical view. No, let's leave that aside first. What I want to call here a pseudo-scientific view. Let me not use the word pseudo, semi-scientific view. What I have here is really the idea, or let me call it by its theological name, okay? Let me just call it by its theological name. I was avoiding that. Its theological name is Traducianism. I would call it a semi-scientific name, okay? I mean semi-scientific view. It somehow incorporates science, it includes science, but it recognizes that we actually have a soul, okay? We actually have another existence apart from just the body. Science says, no, we only have chemicals, this is what we see. Traducianism would say, no, we have more than just a body. We have more than just a body. For example, they say that the human soul is not created ex nihilo, out of nothing, by the activity of God. No. They will say the human soul isn't directly given from God. No. Traducianism says the human soul is not eternal, that is to say, it didn't exist before the father and the mother came together. They say the human soul begins where the sperm meets the ovary and fertilization takes place. When a man and a woman comes together in the act of marriage, and then the sperm of the man comes into contact with the ovary of the woman, there's a fertilization that takes place to produce a third human being. Is that right? There is one first human being, the man, the second, the woman. When they come together, they produce a third human being. And the soul of that third human being comes into that human being at the time of what? Fertilization. At the time the sperm meets the ovary. Then a soul is manufactured. That means before the sperm and the ovary came, the soul didn't exist, isn't it? That's what I'm calling it a pseudo-scientific view, kind of semi-scientific view, but its technical name is traducianism. So according to traducianism, the soul of man comes to being when there's a meeting of the male and female seeds. We do not believe this is correct. Because remember, Jeremiah is told that before you were born in your mother's womb, isn't it? I knew. So there was a you before you were in your mother's womb. There was a you. In fact, in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4 and verse 5, it says, before the foundations of the world, that is before the world was created, before Adam was created, God chose us in him. So we existed even before Adam was created. Do you see what I'm saying? So it cannot be that our souls, according to the Bible, came to be when the male and the female seed met. No, it was far before that. And that brings us to the biblical view, all right? That view is the biblical view. And biblical view is simply creationism. That every human being is directly created by God. That the mechanics of putting me together in my mother's womb is simply a process of actualizing an existence that was there in the mind of God and in the plan of God and in the decree of God. That's what scripture would say, I existed before I was born. Even Eve being formed out of the side of Adam doesn't mean that Adam gave Eve life. Eve's life came from who? From God directly. It's from God. So human souls come from the Lord. And that is why the Lord says that He is the Lord of all souls, and that every soul must ultimately return to Him for reckoning and for accounting. Very, very important. But this brings us to something else that I want us to consider together before we take a break. Something I want us to consider together before we take a break. How many parts are there to man? In other words, we are dealing now with the nature of man. The nature of man. We've dealt with theories of creation. The creation of man. All right? The origin of the soul. And now I want us to consider briefly the nature of man. Now, the only reason I want us to consider this is there has been teaching that is very current within evangelical Christianity, and I mean many denominations would really subscribe to this kind of view actually. And it is a view of man that we in theology classify as trichotomy. Every time you deal with a tri, you're dealing with three, right? Tricycle, a cycle of three wheels. Triunity, a unity of three. So trichotomy refers to a three-fold nature. This is a teaching that says man is composed of three parts. And they will say the first part is that which they call the body. The second part is soul. The third part they will classify as the spirit. They will say that the human being is composed of those three parts: the body, the soul, the spirit. That as I look at you, Dick, that there are three parts to you. That there's a part I'm seeing which is called the body, and there's another part to you that I'm seeing, well, I'm not seeing it, which is called the soul, and there's another part of you that I'm not seeing, which is called the spirit. And this teaching goes on to say that the body is the implementing organ of you. The soul is where your will, emotions, your will and emotions are, all right? And then your spirit is your most holy part. This teaching therefore says that sin does not live in the body, really. The body only commits sin. But sin lives in this part of you, the soul. This is what trichotomy says, all right? Man is three parts, and many of them will explain the three parts in this way. The body is simply a servant, a glove. You understand a glove? Does the glove cut grass? But you use it to cut grass, isn't it? So it's only a tool or a slash or something. It doesn't have a mind of its own. It only does what it is told to do. They say that's the body, the implementing organ. It only carries out what these two decide. They say here, in fact, the mind is put here as well, they say. So the soul is where the mind is. And what is the mind? But where we process thoughts, isn't it? Where we think, where we make decisions, where the will is. And emotions are how we feel. When I think of something, it produces feelings in me. I think of my father, who is now late, is dead, and I feel sad. The thought of my father brings sadness, isn't it? I think of my wife at home, and I'm filled with happiness. The thought of my wife brings happiness. So it is the mind that brings emotions. Emotions lead us to make decisions. I've seen Tom, I'm happy. I'm going to buy him lunch. Thought, feeling, will, decision. You see how it goes? I cannot do what I've not thought about. And in fact, I cannot do what I've not felt moved to do. And sin, therefore, they say, lives where? In the soul. That's the scripture. They say the soul that sins shall surely die. Because sin lives in the soul. It is in our thoughts. It's in our mind. It's in the things we feel. It's in the decisions we make. So where is the dirty part of man? Soul. It's a very funny teaching, this one. But somehow, they would explain that the spirit was not affected by sin and the fall. That when man fell in sin, that part of you was not affected. It remained holy, pure, righteous. It is the part of you that relates with God. They say, for example, this is an example that I've had being given. When you're just about to do something wrong, there are usually two voices. Isn't it? You're about to steal. One voice tells you, don't. The other tells you, do it. One tells you, it is wrong. The other tells you, it's okay. They say those two voices, one is of the soul, the other is of the spirit which respects God, obeys God, is telling you, don't do it. But the soul which is in rebellion to God is telling you, do it. And if you choose to obey the spirit, your body will serve God. If you choose to obey the soul, your body will serve sin. So the body is in the middle. In fact, Creflo Dollar, an American preacher, this is how he put it. He put the body at the center, okay? And then put the soul to the left. And then he put the spirit to the right. Now, Creflo Dollar is explaining the relationship between the three parts of the human being in this way. If your body turns towards your soul, okay, it begins to do what? Sin. Because sin is in the soul. But if you train your body to turn, so this is sin, and this is righteousness. So if your body turns to the soul, you begin to do righteous things. But if your body turns to the... This is what Creflo Dollar said. It's amazing. It's wrong, actually. But they have their verses, of course, yes? I think in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 23, you will hear body, soul, and spirit being mentioned there, okay? In Luke chapter 1, verse 46 and 47, again, Mary will talk about soul and spirit, and so on and so forth. Now, we believe that this teaching is wrong, that it misunderstands the Bible. It misrepresents the Bible. We believe the Bible teaches another thing, another view of the nature of man, which we call dichotomy. Di means what? Two, that's right. So this teaching says that man is only composed of two parts. The body is the first part, but there's a second part which is called the soul, but we call the soul the spirit also. So we say these are two names of the same thing. Trichotomy differentiates those two. In dichotomy, we say those are two names of the same thing. Tom, the other name is Otina. Is Otina a different man from Tom? Yeah. Two names, same person. Two names, same thing. You say man has only two parts to him. That is dichotomy. Two parts to him. Now, this is what the scripture teaches us. For example, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7. We read the creation of man. This is the first place where we read of man being created. Are we together? When God creates man, we don't see three processes. We do not. We only see how many processes? Two. Genesis 2:7. And God made man out of the dust of the ground. So that's the first process. That's the first step. Man is made out of the dust of the ground. Second process is what? God breathes into him the breath of life and man becomes. So how many parts are there to man? Two. Dust and breath. We say breath of God. Dust of ground. So those are the two things you see in creation. Dust of the ground, the breath of God. Dust of the ground, the breath of God. But I think there's another thing to be said about dichotomy as opposed to trichotomy. You here, your experience is not a trichotomous experience, it is a dichotomous experience. Do you feel like three? I don't. I feel like two. Sometimes I want to come to class, right? Did you hear I said I? I want to come to class, but my body doesn't want to. Feel like I'm tired, isn't it? Feel like I could do with a break. Feel like I could do with a holiday or something. But my heart wants to come, isn't it? There's no third thing, is there? You don't feel three, you feel two. That is an ordinary human experience. There's more to be said. When Jesus is dying at the cross, just before he dies, what does he say? Not it is finished. No. What does he say? Something else? No. At the cross. No, not the cross. That he said before. But on the cross, the last words he said and then he died were what? Father, into your hands I commit my soul. And then he gave up the spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, did he say into your hands I deliver my soul and my spirit? Some of your versions would use the word, into your hands I now commit my soul. But some of your versions would say, into your hands I commit my spirit. In other words, spirit is the same thing as soul. The same thing you'd find in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 21, Ecclesiastes chapter 7. All right? It says, when somebody dies, his body is left here, but his spirit goes to God. There are only two parts. When I die, what are people left with to bury? What are they left with? The body. But what has gone in the presence of God? My spirit or my? There are not three, there's only two. But the reason why the trichotomies are confused is what in the Bible we sometimes call multiplication of language. Now that's a figure of speech. When you multiply words in order to emphasize something, you multiply words. Not exaggeration, that's hyperbole. Okay? Multiply words. For example, if you say, Rehema, I, Mwalimu, I was very happy. In fact, I was very glad. You describe your mood by using two words. Word number one, two, happy, glad. Are those two different feelings? But if you use two words, I was happy. In fact, I was glad. You're simply emphasizing your feeling by multiplying language. Sitakubali, tena haitafanyika. Well, I'm not saying two different things, am I? I'm using two different words to say the same things. I'm not going to do what you ask me to do. We talk like that all the time. And scripture talks like that all the time. Serve the Lord with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your heart, with all your spirit, with all your body. Well, is my heart there, and then my body there, and then my spirit over here, and then my mind over there? So let me begin by serving with my body, and then after I finish with that, I'll go find my mind and serve with my mind. Is that what we're saying? No. Multiplying words just to make the point. And when trichotomists read verses like that, for example, In Luke chapter 1, verse 46 and 47, Mary says, "My spirit rejoices in the Lord Almighty. My soul magnifies the Lord." She uses the word spirit and soul as if they are two different words. That's what we call a Hebrew parallelism. Synthetic parallelism, yes, is what we call it. Or rather, synonymous parallelism, where the first line simply emphasizes the next line, or the next line amplifies the first line. Okay? So we believe then that man is a dichotomous being, means is two parts, not trichotomous, three parts. As I will tell you later, a belief in trichotomy has massive implications on our theology. And I'm not just going to go into that now. I'm not going to go into that now. Because if you believe in trichotomy, people, then you will have to believe in this, idea of stages of salvation. That I am saved, born again, and then I'm delivered, right? And this deliverance here happens in the soul, where the seed is still there. It's terrible, isn't it? So it has implications on our soteriology. It's very important. But it also means then that the fall was not total. We cannot deal with total depravity because there's a part of man that was not affected by the fall. The part they're calling the spirit. That's a false teaching. We cannot accept that. Any question here?